I'll speak to Samuel Cranny-Evans, who's a research analyst at the Royal United Services Institute. Samuel, welcome to the program. Give us your analysis about whether there may well be a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And if you think there is time running out, given that many analysts are saying, look, the freezing ground is going to help those Russian tanks move across that area?
So I think it kind of, as the White House has said, it's not clear that there will be an invasion yet. I think it's important to realize that Russia would very much look to keep this a local affair if it could, and prevent it becoming a regional or global war. So there's a lot at stake here for Russia and every country around it. So the cause for an invasion and the grounds for an invasion would have to be very solid before Russia actually does anything. And it would have to be quite certain that there's no other means for it to actually achieve what it wants. Now, in terms of the ground freezing, that's quite an interesting thing that keeps reappearing. But really, if you get into the terramechanics of how soil interacts with an armored vehicle as it moves over it, it gets quite complex. And it doesn't necessarily follow that if it thaws that the Russians won't be able to advance. There's a relatively good road network in Ukraine. There's lots of fresh ground for them to move over. And just because ground is wet or muddy, it doesn't mean that a tank cannot move over it, for instance.
Yeah, good. I'm glad an expert has finally explained that so clearly, because so many people, as you say, have been repeating this line. OK, so if you think that Vladimir Putin, as everybody is saying, is trying to get his way with NATO in the West and his country's security concerns to be addressed by those Western powers, if this is that sort of power play and there isn't going to be an invasion of Ukraine, what might his intentions be about those separatist areas there in the Donbass area? I mean, might he be looking at a longer-term strategy to try to have those become semi-autonomous from Kiev's rule or even part of Russian territory? Might he have some kind of inclination towards that move?
I think we have to be careful in terms of second-guessing what assumptions Putin or anybody advising him in Russia is making or are making. I think it's quite clear that he has asked the Russian general staff to draw up a military solution to the problems that Russia faces. And the problems that Russia feels it is facing is that in the short term, it feels like Russia is going to be blockaded and kept in by all of these states that won't be friendly to it. Feels that it might lose access, for instance, through the Arctic and things like that. So it sees that potentially this is a moment of great opportunity. It can either secure its place in the world as a very important hinge power, or it can be hemmed in and prevented from doing anything at all. And so that's potentially why this is a moment of criticality for the Kremlin. In terms of what may happen in the Donbass, there is already theoretically a presence there that would prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, but there is a question over what that presence actually does for Russia and the problems that it creates for it. And it's also difficult to say whether or not he would look to federalize those states, because that is notionally what would have happened under the Minsk agreements if they had been agreed to. So it seems at this point that the Minsk having failed, Russia is looking for something more concrete or something that it can extract from NATO to prevent that blockade that we discussed previously.
Yeah, I mean, that more medium or longer term aspiration of Ukraine's to join NATO, let's see what happens. We know that the two sides are diametrically opposed, that NATO says, look, if a sovereign state wants to join, we will definitely consider that. Putin has just said there, standing next to Viktor Orban, what happens if Ukraine joins NATO and then Kiev decides to try to retake the Crimea by force? Are we, the Russians, supposed to go to war with NATO? So rather than suppose what might happen in the future, Samuel, what about this statement from Volodymyr Zelensky when he said that, look, if there is a war between Ukraine and Russia, believe me, it's going to be a Europe-wide war. And you've just spoken there about trying to limit the conflict. Would it be possible to limit it geographically if there were to be such a conflict?
Yeah, so what Russia would look to do is create friction within the military and diplomatic sphere. And it has potentially lots of levers to do that. it's the kind of things that often get associated with the phrase hybrid warfare or grey zone warfare, that kind of thing. It's designed to create confusion and obfuscate the decision-making process. And we can kind of see at the moment that the response from across Europe is far from unified. It's far from a single voice speaking out against what is happening. And so from there, it's not too difficult to see how Russia could potentially exacerbate and lean on some of those frictions to create additional friction and prevent the conflict from becoming a regional or a global one. And it would very much be in Russia's interest to prevent it from becoming a regional conflict, a conflict involving multiple states in that area, and definitely not a global one, because as long as it remains local, i.e. between Russia and Ukraine, Russia holds all of the cards and it holds escalation dominance.
Samuel, thank you so much indeed for the analysis. Really appreciate it. Samuel Cranny-Evans.